Hello, hello. Welcome to Common Censored. I'm Lee Camp, joined as always by Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello, hello.
And if you're new to Common Censored, this is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other stuff.
And we got a lot of stuff to get into this week. There's obviously we're going to give you the update on the impeachment shenanigans. We've got just a lot of interesting stuff. Maybe Facebook, California suing over emission standards. Let's get moving.
Before you dive in, let me just say that I am talking about this on my show this week.
The impeachment stuff.
Yes, which comes out on Wednesday, the 2nd. So, just so you know, we're not going to dig in really deep, but there's more to be had in my show Act Out.
Right, and I went into it somewhat on the last episode of Redacted Tonight, so you can get more on the impeachment chaos as we spiral the drain in tighter and tighter circles on both of our shows. But I did want to give a quick recap so we don't act like we're living in some alternate universe where we're not surrounded by the news. If you've seen anything of the mainstream media, it is two completely separate worlds. It is amazing. Like, there is Fox News, which is saying, not only did Donald Trump never do anything wrong, but also he continues to never do anything wrong, and he never did anything wrong, and he's just trying to he's trying to drain the swamp. Eleanor, he's trying to drain the swamp, okay? Stop getting in his way as he drains the swamp.
I wish that he would drain the swamp of swamp creatures like Joe Biden.
And as he does his own swamp creatures, like if he could get rid of Mike Pompeo and all the rest, in the same mass purge.
Or how about Pence? The guy who's next in line for the presidency if impeachment goes through. And I feel like, and again, I'm talking about this on my show, but I feel like people think that somehow if impeachment happens, I don't know, either Mike Pence is going to see the light and be not a dick whistler, or if like somebody else gets to step in. I don't understand why the thinking stops right after you get after Trump. Get Trump out. Why does the thinking stop there?
I've got a theory on that in a second. Okay. But I want to finish what I was saying. So then there's the other side of the media landscape, which is CNN, MSNBC, NBC, etc. That is, this is the most egregious crime we've ever seen in the history of presidencies, and he has to be impeached right now, and it's unbelievable that he had a secret server where he held these conversations with the president of Ukraine. And what you won't hear is kind of our view on this, which is, of course Trump is corrupt. Absolutely. On every level. And also, Joe Biden is corrupt. And also, what we did in the Ukraine by, teaming up with Nazis to help fund a coup is also perhaps a little bit corrupt of us.
Just a bit.
That's not to say I love previous Ukrainian presidents or current Ukrainian presidents. It's nothing about that. It's how about the United States step the fuck back and let countries have their own, self-determination. But there's enough corruption to go around on all sides, and instead you have these two sides of this media landscape that is acting like they live in two completely separate realities. To get to what I was going to say as to why this is, why they think he's different from Pence, is that the real crime that Donald Trump has done to our ruling elite, not to you and me, not to America, you could go down a list of gutting the EPA and trying to gut public schools and fucking, xenophobia and racism. You go down the list. But not that stuff. That stuff's not really a problem. But what he's done that is beyond the pale, which is what they want to impeach him for now, is going after the ruling elite. He was going after Joe Biden. He wanted, and he's apparently reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. So he's not playing the game the ruling elite are supposed to play, which is we all scratch each other's back, we help each other out, we make sure our corruption is hidden, is not exposed.
But the ironic thing is that it's going to be more exposed now. Like, people who don't even know about the whole Biden thing will hear about it because, let's say, and I talk about this on my show as well, let's say that the vote hits the Senate. Let's say that the House votes to impeach him. And that means that the Senate, the way that this works, is that the Senate becomes a judge and the jury for this situation. And that means, do you really think that Mitch McConnell isn't going to drag Biden through the mud? Like, are we fucking kidding? Like, so the fact that people don't know about Biden's bullshittery now, it only ensures that they will know about it.
No, I think this is a bit, well, you're right, but I think they felt it was too late to keep that can of worms closed because this was kind of a preemptive strike because they found out Trump was going after this, hunting for this. I bet you in the deep state circles, there was a lot of talk about how Trump was looking into what Biden did in the Ukraine, which we talked about that last week, so I'm not going to go into those details. I also talked about it on Redacted tonight, but and so I think the Democrats knew this was coming out. Like this wasn't going to remain a secret throughout the next election.
But however, there's a difference between like opening a can of worms and shining a light on that can of worms. The Democrats and the media could just do what they always do when some shit comes out, like some really intense information. I don't know, like the polar ice caps melting, and just ignore it.
Yes, you can ignore it if Trump's not talking about it, which he's not talking about the polar ice caps melting. But if Trump and Fox News, his bullhorn, are going on day after day about something, which has been true for other things, like the Democrats didn't want to talk about Hillary Clinton wiping her email server and shit like that, but they couldn't just ignore it because the right wing was putting it on the news all day long. Whereas the things they agree to cover up, such as all of the war crimes revealed by WikiLeaks, etc., that they can cover up, or largely because both sides are agreeing not to talk about it.
Well, so here's the thing. I go into this on my episode. I just don't want to spend this entire podcast talking about this because
I know
we both talk about it on our shows. And
all right.
Yeah.
Last point on this, and then we're done with it. I love that some of our mainstream media, or a lot of it, especially the Democrats, are still trying to make this a Cold War McCarthyism issue, which is fucking incredible to me. Like, they'll just throw in something. I can't remember which one it was. Maybe Nancy Pelosi, maybe some other congressperson, was like, we need to find out what Donald Trump said to the Ukrainian president, every word of it. We also need to know what he said to Putin, and we need, as if they're somehow connected. Trump working with the U.S.-backed, head of Ukraine is somehow connected to Putin. It's like, They fucking don't have anything to do with each other, but they still want it to be. And actually, I saw one other person on one of these mainstream networks simply just go, and I still think Putin has something to do with this. You could just throw that in there. You don't have to have any proof. You don't have any evidence.
Well, no, it's the association game, right? So just the fact that you talk about it, it's like they do with the like Pavlov's dog. Every time that he was a Russian. Every time that the dog got fed, this was a psychological experiment. Every time that the dog got fed, they'd ring a bell. And so after a while, every time the dog heard the bell, its mouth would water and it would think that food's coming. So now, every time you mention some shit that's wrong with our country, you just mention Russia, and pretty soon, everything you hear that's wrong with this country, you just think Russia. So they're basically conditioning people, and a lot of people are already conditioned to think that everything from climate change, no, seriously, because Russians control the weather, to our fucked up election system, to this corruption that's inherent in our system, has to do with Russia. All of it.
Yeah, and you're right that they've laid kind of like months and months. I mean, there's been years of priming to hate Russia, but just in terms of this, Russiagate that all collapsed, they spent months priming everyone. Russia is trying to get you, like this time around is trying to get you. So all of that priming is useful to just shift it over to this shit with the Ukraine and impeachment. And anyway, it's just amazing to watch them still trying to use McCarthyism, still trying to use red baiting. It's fucking pathetic, and these people are goddamn piles of shit. And yeah, I think that sums it up well.
Indeed. And speaking of Russia, so I've been rereading. I read this years ago, but I've been rereading Václav Havel's *Power of the Powerless*. He was a Czech dissident and ended up being the first president. And he wrote it's basically kind of like an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And there was somebody who was writing about it and said it would be wrong to think of it as anti-communist because at that point in that Soviet bloc, not many people were pro-communist. So it's really just
right.
It's kind of it's him writing freely, which obviously ended up being bad for him. It's him writing freely about the issues with the system, the inherent corruption of the system. It's him writing about that. And so I wanted to share one thing because I thought it was interesting because obviously communist Russia was not the same as our current system. And there was one instance that I think brought that home particularly well. He talks about how living in our truth, which is basically living in opposition to the system because the system is built on lies, living in our truth is an act of dissent, to which I agree. But here's the quote that I wanted to talk about. If the suppression of the aims of life is a complex process, and if it is based on the multifaceted manipulations of all expressions of life, then by the same token, every free expression of life indirectly threatens the totalitarian system politically, including forms of expression to which in other social systems no one would attribute any potential political significance, not to mention explosive power. So putting up refusing to sing along to the national anthem, or in his example, refusing to put up a sign that says "Workers of the World Unite" in your shop window. And I wanted to talk about this because this is something that I've also talked about, and I think Lee, you've talked about this. A lot of activists talk about this, like, small acts, right? Small acts. But I think the issue with our system that's different is that we have this guise of freedom. We have this guise of liberty, but, well, of course you could write a book called The Power of the Powerless. Of course you can, you can put out a song that's very anti-government. You're allowed to do that because we're a free society. So in our system, as opposed to an actual totalitarian system, you have this sheen of freedom, which actually makes it all the more insidious, which also means that these small acts of writing on your Facebook page, for instance, like "fuck the USA," is not actually a powerful act of dissent because it doesn't actually go against the system. It's part of this, like, you're basically just being a part of that acceptable dissent. It's when you really, like you mentioned, going after the elite, when you're actually blocking a pipeline, when you're actually questioning the inner workings of the system. Those are acts of dissent. But I think it's important that, like, when we read something like this, or when we think about when people say, "Oh, everything helps," the thought is good, but we need to be more clear on what that everything is, because if you're just putting up a tweet every now and then that says "fuck Trump," you're not actually helping.
Well, and it's interesting what is beyond what is the third rail. It's because it's like you're saying, it's not just our government does horrible things sometimes. That's too broad and kind of too, like, known, and it's more things like talking about how Julian Assange is a hero or something. Like, if you look at what our mainstream media will allow, what type of dissident thought, there is plenty that it would allow, but there's certain things that go beyond what they can that the system can easily handle, and what they feel will grow into like a mind virus that would actually impact a lot of people. Occupy at first was small enough that it was like, look, we allow dissent, that's fine, they can be down there. Then all of a sudden it spread into every city, started involving hundreds and hundreds of people, and then it became beyond what was allowable level of dissent.
Well, and it's like that Noam Chomsky quote. I always bastardize it a little little bit, but the basic gist is that you have these two bookends, and they allow you any amount of dissent and disagreement within the confines of these two poles, that being the Democrats and the Republicans, right?
Right. I found out later it's called the Overton window.
Oh. Well, that sounds very psychological. But anything outside of that is not allowed. So you can fucking throw shit and yell and scream and fucking fight all you want if you're just saying, Democrats, no, Republicans, me. But like once you step outside of that, that's actually when it gets dangerous.
Right. And a good example that I think one of the best examples we saw in the past couple of years was with Syria, because it was like they had these debates going on, well, we got to bomb Syria, we got to go into Syria. Other people saying, no, we're overextended, our military we don't need to go into Syria, that's not our problem. And you did have like somewhat of a debate, not a great one, but somewhat of a debate within that window, within those two bookends. But what you couldn't do was say, hey, there actually wasn't a chemical attack, and it would make no sense for Assad, who's winning this civil war, or not even civil war, winning this fucking
proxy war.
Yeah, proxy war. To suddenly gas his people because he was about to win anyway, and now he wants the U.S. to invade. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And if you were to do that, that was beyond what was allowable discussion. Even if you were not saying, oh, I'm certain of this, even if you were just saying, well, what if this, what if that, And Tulsi Gabbard, who went over there, she was beyond what was allowable, so she got completely trashed. And, it showed that they will allow a certain level of debate, but it's got to be within those two sides.
Yeah, I mean, and you had this as part of your stand-up as well. Like, don't ask whether we should bomb today or bomb tomorrow. Ask whether we should be at war at all. I'm not saying that correctly, but
right,
that idea.
The way I phrased it was don't have a debate with your friends about whether too many civilians die from drone bombs. Have a debate about whether we should be at war at all, which you don't actually hear that debate much. You don't, even on Facebook or something, you don't see a lot of people. I mean, you may vaguely see them say like, oh, I want peace, world peace, or whatever, but you won't hear them say like, why the fuck is the U.S. bombing anywhere right now? What gives us the goddamn right to bomb in any other sovereign country right now unless they're fucking actively invading our shores, which none of them are?
Well, and I think the foundation of this point that Václav Havel makes, and that I'm kind of repurposing for our place in time, is that it has to do with discomfort, with allowing yourself and having the bravery to stand up and go up against the system and dissent against the system. And in the Soviet bloc, not having that communist poster in your window was considered an act of dissent. It's like, well, why the fuck aren't you with the rest of us? The idea of publishing something that says...
So you're saying the smaller acts were bigger acts than...
Absolutely, because it was far more of an overt totalitarian regime. Here, if you put up a sign, I mean, you see them all the time, signs that say like, fuck Trump, not my president, whatever. Like, that's totally allowed.
Or impeach.
Right. Or and I'm also thinking about, the signs that I see in people's yards that say like, give peace a chance or whatever. It's these like nebulous sort of non-active like points of quote unquote dissent, but I wouldn't really even call it that. And we have to see that in our, like, based on that feeling of discomfort, our threshold is higher because we have this facade of freedom and liberty. So ours is not putting up a sign. Ours is not publishing a pamphlet saying why Trump is an asshole. Ours has to go beyond that to where we are uncomfortable, to where, yes, that does mean having dinner with your family and being like, no, I don't fucking support the troops. And I'll tell you why. Because this is, the wars are ridiculous. Like, having those conversations, Thanksgiving is not too far away. You could have that conversation too. So I think like that level, it has to be about being uncomfortable with the programming that we all have from the system. Right.
And when you have a system that is fully authoritarian and fully kind of surveillance state, those small acts can create larger cracks in the veneer, like not having that poster up or not saying the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever. Those can be large acts because they show the others, oh wow, this person is doing this thing I thought was completely not allowed, and they're saying they're going to do it anyway. And so that has this big impact. Whereas, as you're saying, in our society, it doesn't have that. Those small acts don't have that big of an impact because they are allowed. Right. And no one's like, oh my God, that person has a world peace poster in their window. Yeah. I didn't know we were allowed to do that.
Exactly.
So yeah, you've got to step it up to have this similar impact.
Yeah, you got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, for sure.
Comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's what I tell everybody when I fart in the elevator. Listen, folks, we all need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's an important step.
And we all dissent in different ways. If you're farting in an elevator in Congress, I'm all for it.
I just stand there quietly while they all seem uncomfortable, and then right as I'm getting off the elevator, I go, power to the people! Okay, some quick things before we move on. You ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. Before we move on, is if you feel like you've gotten or will get throughout the rest of this hour $1 worth out of this show or a little bit more, go to patreon.com/Common Censored. You guys fund this show. We have no ads, you'll notice, for bullshit that we try and sell you. So it all comes down to whether you all want to continue to support this, to continue to have Common Censored playing in your ear holes. And thanks for welcoming us to your ear holes. So that's patreon.com/Common Censored. You can get, let's see, I've started putting up a lot of web exclusive videos. The latest one is on Debbie Wasserman Schultz, brought on CNN as a expert on standing up against corruption. They were like, tell us how Trump is corrupt, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And she said, this is horrible. Trump is corrupt. We need to impeach him. And I was like, oh my God, is this really coming from one of the most corrupt lawmakers ever? Anyway, that's at youtube.com/Moment of Clarity Show. Eleanor is doing amazing work, both video, written. It's all at artkillingapathy.com. You have an incredible article on something which we talked about on the show, which is why plant a tree. The plant a tree movement needs to have a little bit more behind it than just planting a tree.
Yeah, it's got to, quote unquote, dig deeper, if you will.
You're
dig
welcome. Deeper.
You're welcome.
And then pat the dirt back on loosely. Don't push too hard. That's at artkillingapathy.com. You can review us on iTunes, and we love getting your emails. And actually, maybe I'll, for a minute, skip ahead and read a couple of those, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Common Censored at protonmail.com is where you can email us or leave a comment under our videos somewhere else. But Common Censored at protonmail.com. A lot of you responded to Eleanor's story last week, which we never really know which are going to be the things that really make people want to leave comments. But many of you responded to. They responded to your story about being it was in high school, right? Mm-hmm. Being in high school, walking out because of the Iraq War, and having everybody fucking stare at you and think you're crazy pants.
Yeah, I mean, not just stare at me, like people threw food at me in the cafeteria and shit.
Was it at least good stuff you could...
Is cafeteria food ever good
munch
stuff?
On? Well, they bring shit from home,
it's like
right?
Chef Boyardee and
Aren't there
shit,
some
dude.
rich kids that bring shit from home?
No one was throwing a filet mignon at me. No. But
a beyond meat,
right, yeah, especially in North Carolina when they've got a rebel flag on
filet mignon.
But no, I was really stoked that a lot of you could relate to that story, and it's also really cool to see your comments and hear your stories that are in many ways very similar. So thank you for leaving your comments, and I'm really glad that hit you.
John responded and said, I got tossed out of school in Central Florida for protesting the Vietnam War a few days after the Kent State massacre. I, too, was fired up. I love your fire. Polona commented and said, sorry for commenting again. She has another comment down there. But when you described how you felt while protesting, Eleanor, it really hit home. I was also ridiculed or just ignored. The signs I put up on news boards were just taken down, while one teacher told me I looked ridiculous in my keffiyeh and I looked like Yasser Arafat. I remember almost crying at one point, not for myself, but from sheer frustration that no one else felt the awful criminality of the invasions, and they just didn't care. And like you, no matter how uncomfortable it was, I felt I had a responsibility to keep protesting because I was the only one. Those feelings are indeed so different from joining popular protests.
Yeah, beautifully put. And thank you for that comment. And I think that basically just ties into the whole Václav Havel thing that we just talked about as well. This idea that whatever it is that makes you uncomfortable in asserting your truth and actual reality against the system's lies and against systemic corruption, that's what you have to do. And so it has to go beyond quietly thinking to yourself, I'm against war. It has to be an outward show that has some sort of effect on the people around you, on, of course, as well on the system. So
dumping pig's blood down your naked body. That's what I did.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's gotta,
As a vegetarian, was that uncomfortable for you?
It was mainly corn syrup.
That's disgusting.
It was just a touch of pig's blood.
Do you have any idea how sticky corn syrup is?
I love how I said pig's blood. That didn't bother you, but then I said corn syrup, and you go, "That's disgusting."
It is. Okay, well, I went to school in Sweden, and we would have the blood patties. Blood patties and lingonberries.
They have some euphemism. What's it called? Something pudding in the UK.
Blood pudding.
Is it called blood pudding?
Oh, I don't know. But in the UK, they've
got
black
pudding. I think
black pudding. Yeah, because it looks black. It is.
Repulsive.
It's
all right, folks.
yummy.
Totally repulsive. Last comment. This is not about the walkout, but it's a good point. Ben Johnson says, the sudden call to begin to impeach Trump over the Biden issue reminds me of the McCarthy witch hunts. I mean, definitely some differences. But Congress didn't give a fuck about what he did to thousands of people, meaning McCarthy, or how he destroyed their lives. But when he said he had a list of names of congressmen who supported communism, then and only then did they move to stop him. History repeats itself. And that's exactly, great point, Ben. That's exactly what I was saying earlier about Trump, was that it's, all of the other horrible things he's done, congratulating white supremacists in Charlottesville after they basically murdered someone, that kind of shit. They did the outrage. They would go on TV and act outraged, but they weren't talking about impeachment until, wait, he's going after one of our corrupt people?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, dear God.
Uncle Joe?
Uncle Joe, what pieces of the original Uncle Joe still remain in the new Madame Tussauds wax version we have?
Dwindling.
All right, let's keep it moving.
Yes.
If you want to email us, that's commoncensored@protonmail.com. Okay, and as many of you know, I've also started putting the podcast up on YouTube, so you can quote unquote watch it there. We don't have a video, but people like to just hit play on YouTube, so that's.
But we've been thinking about throwing in some cat videos or something.
That'd be amazing. We're like, we gotta find ways to stand up, and meanwhile, there's like a cat playing with a yarn. Okay, that would help it go down a little easier. But let's move on to Facebook is giving politicians, and actually this goes to what we were just saying about what's allowable and not on these on social platforms and stuff. Facebook is giving politicians a free pass on hate speech. Basically, Facebook has decided that their rules, which are always evolving because they're getting so much pushback on what's allowed on Facebook, do not apply basically to politicians. So you cannot go on Facebook and say, I hope someone will die, or, even, I think I know, not that this is a positive thing, but I think I know someone who had their page removed because they said, I hope you kill yourself, which arguably is not saying you're going to kill someone. Anyway, so they have those rules against that. However, if you're a politician, if you're one of our ruling elite accepting millions of dollars to continue to be in the public eye, then totes fine.
Well, and also this goes beyond the original decision by Facebook. So Facebook, with their, Atlantic Council fact checking that they've been doing.
Atlantic Council, offshoot of NATO.
So neocon fucking organization that does quote unquote fact checking for Facebook and labels shit like, RT America or Lee's Show or Mint Press News or things like that as false. Meanwhile, CNN and shit, they always get the gold star. But something that they haven't been doing for over a year, they haven't been fact checking politicians' posts. So when a neo-Nazi in fucking Illinois or something, a politician writes a post about how, I don't know, like black people's IQs are naturally lower than whites, there's no fact-checking happening on Facebook's side because he's a politician. Now they're going even further to say that hate speech, according to their own rules, won't be taken down if it's a politician because, quote, it's newsworthy content. Basically meaning that it's going to get a bunch of shares, it's going to go viral, and that's all they fucking care about is the use of their platform and putting out quote-unquote newsworthy content.
Well, and at the deeper level is they're using the newsworthy content as kind of an excuse because at the deeper level it is who's allowing Facebook to continue to operate, these same politicians, who is spending millions and probably closer to billions of dollars on political advertising connected to Facebook and Instagram. It is politicians. So if they lose out on all political ad dollars and all political advertising at all, that is a phenomenal amount of money that they would be saying goodbye to.
Well, and also, incidentally, Facebook's head of policy is a guy named Nick Clegg, who is himself a former politician.
Oh, yeah. In Britain, right?
I don't know. But he basically...
I might think of someone else.
He basically said that... So basically, the company has announced that it doesn't think that it's, quote, appropriate for us to referee political debates and prevent a politician's speech from reaching its audience and being subject to public debate and scrutiny, which reminds me of that CNN segment that I saw once where like at the bottom third where they have what the conversation is about, it said, "Are Jews people?" And they were having a panel discussion. CNN, right. They were having a fucking panel discussion.
Right.
So here's the thing. That type of shit is not up for debate. All that does is foment violence and bring up the idea that, oh, well, maybe they're not. And same thing with extreme, white supremacy and things like that, or, like trans people aren't really people, or they don't deserve human rights, or women don't deserve basic human rights. These are not up for fucking debate. And the fact that they're allowed on platforms like Facebook make it sound like these are still up for debate when they're fucking not.
Yeah.
So it's not about asking Facebook to referee when somebody says, you know what, I really don't think that we should augment our tax code. That's not what the fuck this is about. This is about alienating people's basic human rights for the sake of clickbait.
And they do the reverse, where you could say something true about what the U.S. is doing overseas, or, say something like U.S. helicopter pilots have, murdered innocent civilians on video, and you can hear them cheering as they do it. You could say something like that, and they would call that hate speech, not all the time, but at times, and, suspend you or ban you or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you could say the truth and be suspended.
Yeah, exactly. So this is yet another display of Facebook's absolute corruption and the tight friendship between Facebook and the system. And another reason why I say, I get it if you don't want to delete your Facebook account, but we should not be looking to Facebook for our news. We should be aware of what we're giving up when we use a platform like Facebook, i.e. all of our fucking personal information. Just know what you're getting into while you're watching those pictures of your niece fucking playing with a banana or whatever the fuck.
That's not what I'm using Facebook for. All right, let's move on to, one of the things. I wish Trump could be impeached for something like this, his fucking shitty ass pro-climate change, pro-climate destruction of the world, those type of behaviors, rather than he pointed out that Joe Biden is a piece of shit.
Well, so And the other thing here is that this once again flies in the face of
this next story.
Yes, this next story flies in the face of the conservative argument for states' rights. You oftentimes hear that we should have a smaller federal government, out of our business, it's up to states. Until it's not.
Until we want it.
When it has to do with gun laws, when it has to do with access to safe abortion and reproductive rights, or when it has to do with climate, fuck your states' rights. So recently, the Trump administration basically said that California does not have the right to have stricter pollution standards than the federal EPA because the EPA has fucked pollution standards. I mean, the guy who heads the EPA doesn't think that the EPA should exist, so that should tell you everything that you need to know.
So hold on, you're saying, so California has gone beyond what is required by the EPA.
Right.
They're doing a better job of cutting emissions.
And the Trump administration says that you can't do that, and now California is suing.
You can't go outside the EPA.
Yes, and now California is suing for the right
to have cleaner skies.
To have cleaner skies.
For the right to not have children suffering from asthma.
Right, because basically, and there are several...
By the way, fly into Los Angeles sometime and look at the clouds over that city and tell me it's clean enough.
Dude, I lived downtown LA for several years, and my doctor told me, she's like, you're basically smoking a pack a day.
Jesus Christ.
So yeah, good times. But this is a fight that's reached to other states as well, because many other states had joined California in getting stricter standards than the EPA demanded. I mean, this started back in the 1970s when California was first allowed to set tougher rules than federal standards on their auto emissions, because this is, I mean, if you look at California now, that's fucked. But if you look at LA, like in the 70s, the smog was so bad that you could often not see like right in front of your fucking face.
Right. A lot of people don't realize that, like, in certain areas, not in the world as a whole, but in certain areas, we've improved the, how much we fight against pollution and things like that, because there were times when a lot of the rivers in the U.S. were basically flammable, and so. Well,
and if you've ever lived in LA, then you know that you have to, and you have a car, which most people do, you know that you have to get it smog tested, which means that you take it into some smog testing place, they stick a fucking computer up your tailpipe.
What was that? Hold on, I just tuned in.
There's also places that do that. Hopefully they don't send that information to the government, but
I was at Brookstone in one of those massage chairs, and for a moment I thought they stuck a computer up my tailpipe.
And they basically read what comes out of the tailpipe, and if it's too high, then you can't drive. If it, and then they give you like a sticker that says smog tested. And this is that same.
Brookstone gave me the same thing.
Did you pass or did you fail? Or is that classified?
I passed something.
Alrighty. So and this is part of those stricter regulations, because obviously in other states you don't have to go through the smog testing. So this was one of the things that California did in order to get those stricter regulations and have fucking cleaner air. And now. And California is not the only state that is fighting this Trump administration dictate that they can't have stricter air regulations. Other states are Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, surprisingly North Carolina, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin, as well as the cities of New York and D.C.
I admit I don't know how law works and things like that. Why can't they just fucking ignore him?
Exactly. Because this is my feeling.
He just feel like he tweets out laws now. He's like, from here on out, you can kick kids at the border. It's legal. Just kick them.
Right. So this is my feeling, too, is that, and I'm not saying that California shouldn't sue for the right to have stricter air quality standards. Absolutely go through the justice system, quote unquote. But just like with anything else, just like with, the construction of a pipeline, you should go through the legal means, but you should also set your fucking self in front of that pipeline construction. So I think the same thing applies here. Yes, go through those judicial means, but also why don't you just say, fuck you, we're keeping our smog tests, we're keeping our stricter Clean Air Act, and you can shove it.
Is it because in order to do that, you would basically need the entirety of your bureaucracy to decide all at once, we're going to ignore the president's whatever dictate, mandate, whatever the fuck 8 thing he did? Like, so it is very, so maybe it's tougher than I might think for a entire state government to say we're not listening to Donald Trump who said such and such.
Well, but isn't it just as hard to switch everything over?
No, I don't mean it's difficult. I just mean you just because people work in a state government, which may be more left than Donald Trump, doesn't mean that all these technocrats and everything, all the people within a state government are willing to just ignore a mandate by the president.
Well, I think that's the key of this, is that people should be, because people... because these conversations are happening around water coolers like, hey, this is really fucked up.
I get that.
I wish there's something we could do about it.
No,
like,
I get
it.
I absolutely believe they should. Maybe that's what I was missing in terms of like, why don't you just ignore him? Well, that's maybe not very easy to get everyone to ignore him.
Well, but that's the other thing, is that do you need everybody, or do you just need, like, the managers of these bureaus or whatever the fuck, like, and even the governor of California.
You get one good assassin to take out a few people, and I think you're fine.
California's Governor Gavin Newsom said that the move was just to assert power and dominance, so he disagrees with the move. So in my mind, why doesn't the governor just say, you know what, fuck this guy, we're sticking with it as your governor, and as a proponent of states' rights, I say fuck this noise, and let's keep our strict air standards.
So speaking of this exact thing, and this also speaks to how fucking awful, just repulsive, troll-based, oozing shit out of their fucking eyes these human beings are. Recently, a leaked audio came out of basically big oil lobbyists or lawyers complaining, basically who a big oil, the people big oil corporation sends to have these meetings with Trump administration. So they're meeting with Trump administration, and they're complaining that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is not, quote, the rollbacks are not happening quick enough, meaning it's not being gutted quick enough under Donald Trump. And they worried that these mandates that Trump may be putting forward because they can easily be undone by the next president. They want more permanent stuff. So basically, this is big oil saying, you're super incompetent. You put super incompetent people in these positions. We need not incompetence. We need some hardcore fucking fighters that get in and start ripping out the wiring of the EPA, as opposed to getting in and just going, hey, everybody, stop listening to the EPA. We're not going to enforce any of that shit. They want things in permanently that cannot be undone too easily by the next president. And like, it's just amazing to hear that. It also provides a great level of proof or evidence to what you've said, which is you impeach Trump, you get in Mike Pence. Mm-hmm. What have you helped? Perhaps you've even made things worse, because Pence is not going to sit around and put fucking the intern that happened to compliment Trump's shoes in charge of the EPA. He's going to get some real fucking lawyers that know how to do this shit, that know how to go in there and gut this shit. And rather than the incompetence that Trump is exhibiting, you would have actual fine-tuned machine that the right wing, at least of the Senate, supports, gutting the EPA.
Exactly. And that's, but again, just like that can happen on that side of things, you can get people in that are on the other side of things, that are like, absolutely, we're going to ignore this fucking mandate to make our skies smoggier, and we are going to continue with our push to make our state greener and cleaner, and fuck that guy. So you can do it both ways, and I think it's really quite high time that people ignore Trump, essentially, because the only power that he has is the power that we give him. And if a state like California already has the wheels in motion of having these stricter regulations, well, then just keep rolling.
Yeah, I agree. And Let's talk about, speaking of greener, let's talk about carbon offsets and what California has been talking about there.
Yeah, so here's one of those moments where I'm like, oh, California, really? Because California, though the skies are cleaner than they were in the 70s, is not some like bastion of green perfection. So
well, and you lived there for 10 years, but you were in the midst of the smog. Could hardly see your nose in front of your face. So,
well, the other thing is that, I mean, anywhere in LA is not good air. So even though, yes, I lived in downtown for quite some time, it's not like living in Hollywood is like living in the fucking mountains of Switzerland.
When you're in a place in LA, you start to understand why oxygen bars actually are a thing. You're like, oh, that's the only way people survive. They go from
totally
oxygen bar to oxygen bar.
I always thought it was funny, and I was just recently there again, and I always find this funny. They have these, day spas where everything's like, oh, get the free radicals out of your hair and your skin, and and then have a green juice.
I've always thought of myself as a free radical.
And in my head, I'm like, yeah. Pay like $150 for a green juice enema and then walk outside in the fucking smog-ridden shit. Like, are you serious? Like, this is just so indicative of the power of consumerism over the power of like recognizing your own reality. Like, hey, maybe I should become a climate activist because where I live is fucking disgusting instead of paying $150 for a green juice enema. But that's just me.
Well, literally, the hills of around LA were on fire, and you could drive down the road, and it looked like Armageddon. You're looking at landscape that is just coming in on you, that is totally on fire. But meanwhile, people went about their day. They were kind of like, well, I'm gonna go to get my tits waxed at my regular tit wax place.
I mean, nothing against you if you get your tits waxed. I think that's a lovely thing.
Just remember to wax on and off. You can't.
So on September 19th, the California Air Resources Board endorsed the Tropical Forest Standard, which sounds nice, doesn't it?
That does sound nice.
It sets the groundwork for electric utilities, oil refineries, and other California polluters to, quote, offset their greenhouse gas emissions by paying governments in tropical forest areas, cough, cough, like the Amazon, not to cut down trees. So the carbon offset is basically the idea that I can pay to pollute here, and you'll like save a badger over there. That's the concept of a carbon offset.
So while you're shitting on the sidewalk, you give a guy $5, he cleans up a shit down the road.
Although not even that even. Like, because here's the thing. What the pollution that's thrown up into the air and the water and food by companies like these big corporations. And again, we've covered this before, that there are 100 companies in the world that are responsible for 70% of the global emissions. So
that was this week's Redacted Tonight.
These companies are spewing shit. And meanwhile, they're paying governments in tropical forest areas to not cut down some trees. That's not an equal exchange,
right.
First of all.
Right.
And second of all, there are several things wrong with this. Second of all, it doesn't fucking work because you can pay a government not to do something, and guess what? It doesn't always fucking work. And B,
and they'll probably go. A lot of the chopping down trees is kind of done outside of the law. So the government could collect. Let's say government of Brazil could collect this money, and meanwhile behind their back they're like, yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. Just don't tell us about it. So they're technically not doing it, but
well, and not only that, but polluting the hell out of a place here is not made okay by saving some trees over here. That's not how fucking climate change works. So you can, if you completely destroy, lakes and rivers and, forests in Northern California, for instance, it's not going to do that ecosystem a shit bit of good to know that there's a monkey climbing a tree in the Amazon. Like, that does not fucking help.
Well, and would we be okay with this in other scenarios? Like, if we had a kids in cages offset, so we talked to China, like, all right, we're gonna cage 3 kids on our border, but you let go 3 of your sweatshop workers over there. Like, would everybody be like, oh, that sounds morally fine?
Right. And also what this oftentimes does is, for instance, they'll try and focus on already marginalized communities. So, for instance, something that we saw in, I believe it was in parts of Mexico, there were indigenous communities that were thrown out of their ancestral homelands because they were using some trees, sustainably, obviously, which they've been doing for a very long time. They were using some trees for their daily lives, and they were thrown off because some company had decided that they were going to save that forest or whatever the fuck. And that company, meanwhile, is, incredibly destroying wherever they're based. But they thought it was okay to throw these indigenous folks off their land because these indigenous folks were using some trees for their purposes of survival. So this is another facet of it. It's in a lot of indigenous communities, in fact, have come out against this. Indigenous delegations from Brazil, for instance, have come out against the quote-unquote tropical forest standard, saying that it's a false solution and it's also highly anti-indigenous. It's basically a way for capitalism to make itself feel better while it continues to destroy the world, which is a carbon offset in a nutshell.
But at least it makes us feel better.
Exactly.
So we got that going. All right, in this last story, let's talk a little about polling places because our destruction of our faux democracy continues at a blistering pace. Since the Voting Rights Act, is that correct, was overturned by the Supreme Court in the past couple of years, 1,688 polling places have been closed. That's over the past 6 years. And I also saw an article recently that Texas is leading the way by closing an insane number. Oh, and by the way, I looked this up and then forgot to say anything about it. But yes, Nick Clegg is a British politician who was he's that dickhole who was head of the Lib Dems and basically did fuck all for anybody.
And also, just real quick, it wasn't the entire Voting Rights Act that was overturned. It was a key part.
It was a key part where states that have a traditional problem with their black folks and letting them vote had to get things such as closing of polling places approved by the federal government, and that was taken away. So now these traditionally lightly racist areas of the country are fucking swinging for the fences, closing all the polling places they can. This hurts mainly or largely people of color, and poor people are the ones getting hit the worst by this. But, this is what our politicians do. Try and make it as difficult as possible to vote. They won't give you a day off work. They are trying to cut back on Sunday voting, or early voting. They're doing everything they can to make it as hard as possible. Texas also tried to, I think it ultimately it got stopped, but tried to make it illegal to basically drive a bunch of people to the polls. Like if you
Which
had,
is what
if
a lot
you,
of
if you had more
predominantly black churches
Right.
do. They'll
Right.
meet at the church, then they'll take vans to a polling place.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this was like if you bring more than 3 people or something, then that's a terrorist act or something. Like no, I didn't say that, but
That's pretty amazing
was,
because hypothetically, let's say that you have that you have a bunch of workers that don't have their own cars, so you're just carpooling to the place. Let's say that you have a large family.
That's exactly what it was meant to stop. It was meant to stop people from fucking carpooling. People without cars need help getting there.
Everyone has to take their own Hummer to the polling place, otherwise you're not allowed to vote.
Yeah. Anyway, so on every level, they're trying to stop people from voting. I've gone into detail a million times on things like interstate cross-check, on the purging of the voter rolls, on the DNC claiming they have a right to rig the elections, all this shit. And yet, at the end of the day, what do you see on your mainstream media? Russians! The Russians are going to get us!
Are you saying that the Russians are not the ones who closed the polling places?
Well, okay. Of the 1,688, 1,684 were closed by Russians, but still.
Well, in this again,
the KGB just put a big Russian dude like Drago in front of each polling place.
He's Swedish.
Not in the movie, he's not.
But this is my
you
problem.
You gotta go by the fictional reality. We've had this debate before.
No, and they keep using, so like in House of Cards,
remember the worst thing we ever did was say that dude was not smart.
Oh, I know. And then I got like a bunch of hate mail saying that he's like a fucking like astrophysicist or some shit. But anyway, and fucking, good on you, dude.
Fucking Swedes.
But so in House of Cards, they used one of my favorite Danish actors as the Russian. And I'm like, excuse me,
that
you can't
guy
just use...
is objectively fucking evil, that actor.
Okay, he looks creepy. I admit.
Evil as fuck.
I admit he looks creepy. But that doesn't change the fact that he's lovely and he's Danish and he's not fucking Russian. And I'm tired of them using fucking Scandinavian actors to play Russians. Because not only does that perpetuate a false stereotype, but it also... perpetuates the stupidity of the American people and not knowing the difference between fucking Scandinavians and Russians.
The reason they have to do that is because they can't hire a Russian actor because apparently, and I'm just going off rumor here, but they're all Russian. So there is that. We can't fucking hire Russians because then you have to pay a Russian. That's illegal.
So, this reminds me of an article that I read recently that basically said, and I was drawn in by the headline because it said, yes, our voting machines are I can't remember exactly what it says, but it said like our voting system isn't great, but even more importantly, our voting system leaves the door open for foreign interference. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, holy shit. Okay, so our voting system is so fucked up. That's not the problem, though. It's fucked up because it leaves the door open for Russians, if they would like to walk in. And it's like,
well, see, not a problem for us to rig our own shit, okay?
No, that's our constitutional right.
That's cool. That's part of what we are. That's goddamn Statue of Liberty shit right there, all right?
Literally, that's our constitutional right because the Supreme Court recently said that gerrymandering is A-okay because the Founding Fathers did it, and so cool.
The Founding Fathers did it, yes.
They also had slaves, but, whatever.
There you go. I mean, as we've talked about before, when the Declaration of Independence was written, it was 6% of the country was allowed to vote. White landowning males. So we've had this rigged from the beginning. Mm-hmm. It just then it was more straightforward. The rigging said in the paperwork, white landowning men.
Yeah.
Now we have to write in the paperwork and in the laws, anyone can vote over the age of 18. And then we have to quietly fucking walk around with a baton and hit everyone that we don't want voting in the kneecaps and then say, oops, the polling place is 1,000 miles away, so start crawling. We got to make it far more difficult in far more nefarious ways. And then, in case people start thinking, like, it seems kind of hard to vote in this country, we go, that's fucking Russians.
Yeah.
They did it.
God bless America.
That is our show, but we will head over to patreon.com/Common Censored to do a little extra action over there for those of you who help keep this show going. That's over on Patreon. And if you even got $1 out of today's show, please go over and join us there. We also obviously put out a lot of videos, put out a lot of extra content we'd love for you to check out. If you'd like Redacted Tonight as a podcast and you prefer listening rather than viewing, you can get all that. The podcast is called Moment of Clarity. It's free on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. You also have a podcast of your show, correct?
Yeah, Act Out, same as the video show, and that comes out every Friday. Same thing, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify.
Yeah, so you can do search for Act Out or search for Moment of Clarity, and you could have 3 podcasts, all from us, which would be way too much of us in your head holes.
No, just right.
It'd be just right. It'd be just the right amount. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we will see you next week.
Act out.
Keep fighting.